Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalram, and in today's video I want to showcase you guys the one button subtlety opener macro. With this macro, you're able to get your baseline opener as a subtlety rogue, and are able to establish Snapblade, few eviscerates, open up with a proper shadow dance, and I have two variations of this macro. One for a long range where you open up with a shadow strike to close in on the enemy, and the others to open up with a cheap shot when you're close enough. Now, I'm not a big connoisseur of one button macros because sometimes I feel like they are fun if it's like a really complex rotation. So then I feel like that's worth. But when it's a macro for something very basic that I feel like a player should learn, I am not a big fan of it. My channel is all about rogues and rogue PvP guides and help people improve at rogue, and I feel like having a one button macro that literally does everything for you is not a way to improve at rogue. But there are uses to one button macros. What it does, it helps a player to understand and figure out and see in detail how an opener, for example, should be done, how a rotation or a burst sequence should be accomplished. And that's what I'm making this macro for. So if you're somebody who is currently enjoying Subtlety Rogue and are trying to find out how to get the openers done properly, and all you're trying to do is just learn how to do the rotation at the very beginning as cleanly as possible, then this is the macro for you. So please do pay attention to the abilities that are used. Please do pay attention to the timing of the cooldowns that are used when you are deciding these macros. And without further ado, let's begin. So the first macro we'll cover is the original Subtlety Opener macro. It basically allows you to get a decent opener with setting up your Nightblade, a couple of eviscerates, and getting a shadow dance established properly, in order to have the most amount of CC uptime on the enemy. With this macro, you basically are stun locking the enemy using cheap shot back to back to back, with shadow strikes to fill in gaps, and using up all the calm points whenever you are maxed out. It's a decent opener macro, and ever since they took out Garrote out of the equation, subtlety openers have become a lot more simple. So in this macro, you basically have to start in stealth. You have to start in stealth for this macro to work. And you basically get to the target, make sure you have symbols of death available, and then just spam the macro until it doesn't work anymore. And usually I like to put medium kind of macros that I'm trying to learn somewhere where they are kind of inflated, so I can monitor exactly what's going on and know when they end. So if you do have bartender or any kind of other add-ons, they do change your bars, and you can inflate the bar where the macro is at, just so you can pay attention to it easier. Then I guarantee you should probably do so. Another variation to this macro is simply just by copying the same macro over, which I'll have all the original macros for you guys in the description below, so you don't have to like construct it yourself. But if you copy the same macro over and you replace positioning of cheap shot and shadow strike in the beginning, then you have yourself a different opener macro if you aren't able to reach an enemy. Let's say it is somebody who is kind of a bit too far away, and in certain BG situations sometimes you can allow yourself a shadow strike before a cheap shot in the opener. The reason you usually open up with a cheap shot instead of shadow strike is, let's say you open up with a druid, you shadow strike to them, they stun you. So it depends on the player, I guess, responsiveness, and you're more likely to get away with this macro in BGs where you can shadow strike in the opener than you would in arenas. But this macro basically allows you to close the gap on the enemy and still have your maximum uptime on CC back to back to back, while establishing a blade and throwing 2 eviscerates into your target while having shadow dance available. Now, how much confidence do I have in these macros? I think the macros are well constructed, but because these macros are rigid and do not offer any form of flexibility that one might need in a PvP situation, I feel like that's kind of the downfall of the macros themselves. Because they're just a one button macro, and they usually can be used in specific situations. And for example, as a subtlety rogue, you would need to make sure that you have at least one charge of shadow dance, you are in stealth, and you have cheap shot and shadow strike and enough energy for it all available in order to perform the macro properly. Which is kind of like why I stray away from one button macros, because they're really rigid, they're not flexible. And as a player, in most cases, you should just learn how to play your spec in terms of abilities, in terms of your rotation, in terms of which abilities to follow after one and the other. Because let's say this PvP situation just changes out of nowhere, then you're able to follow with the change and adapt to the change, rather than continuing to spam your one button macro and then nothing's really happening and then you're getting confused about what's going on. These one button macros are to help people in the most specific and best situations. They're not really there to help you out when you are in trouble, and they're there to literally play for you. So that's really the big difference that a lot of people just don't understand when they start using these macros. I think it's like the solution for all, but Not quite, it really does still come down to the player. But please do utilize these macros to help you understand how to play your class or your spec if you do ever play any one-button macros. It's best to first get the macro, play with it, but then dissect it, look through the abilities, look through the sequence, and practice that sequence outside of the one-button macro. The one-button macro is really there to help you start to understand and at least help you get started in playing the spec you're trying to play and accomplishing a specific ability or a sequence of abilities you're trying to accomplish with that spec. And for rogues, it's especially helpful when you're trying to learn the openers, because in the past you had so many different openers, so people would have a one-button macro pair every opener, but with this expansion of Legion, the openers are not too complex, so pretty sure most players should at least learn how to do the openers by themselves. Anyway guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think about it. Hopefully this macro is helpful for you guys. Again, I want to make sure it's clear, I don't really like one-button macros because I feel like sometimes people use them and then don't try to learn from them, so please try to learn from what the one-button macro is offering you. Thanks guys, appreciate it. See you guys in the next one.